Hi everybody, today I'm going to be taking you through a mixed media drawing of poinsettias. I am starting out with my color erase colored pencil just to get the general shapes down. I'm using a couple photo references but kind of just winging it once I have the general idea down. And I wanted to draw these to potentially make a Christmas card. I kind of ran out of time for that, and so maybe I'll save it for something for next year, but this year just ended up kind of getting away from me. So these are the Ecoline brush pen markers, and I just have been obsessed with these lately. They're really juicy and really high pigment. They haven't really let me down yet. I'm really into them. So they work really well with water mediums. Also, I'm doing this drawing on a watercolor paper. I can probably bring that up. I usually use like a smooth Bristol paper, but I knew I wanted to do a lot of water media with this, so went with watercolor paper, wanted kind of that rougher texture to it. Using these markers kind of as a base as your watercolor is really interesting. I do watercolor in a very different way than most people do. It's not my favorite paint ever, so I kind of prefer doing watercolor markers and having more of like a bold watercolor look. I'm also using some Tombow brush pen markers, dual brush pen markers. Those are like one of my go-to markers. So I'm basically just laying down these big color fields, and then I am going to be inking it as well, just because I wanted kind of a darker, more intense contrast. I think it's really interesting with these markers. You can create a lot of texture with them depending on the angle and how many times you kind of go over a certain spot. You can leave it a little bit more transparent and leave some of those marker lines, which I'm using to kind of show the texture of the leaf. Then some other parts I'm kind of coloring in a little bit more in an abstract way to just really fill in the color. These also work really well with water, so you could also wet that surface area and kind of make the color bleed a little bit or thin it out. I don't know, there's a lot of really interesting ways you can experiment with these. I didn't really have a super big plan for this. I kind of just wanted to get a lot of ink on the page and a lot of color on it, and really I wanted it to be almost like there was just a lot going on, a lot of pattern, a lot of texture, just kind of an intense drawing. I'm using my Pentel brush pen, inking pen thing. I'll put it in the description. I can never remember the full name of it. It's too many words. It's basically just an ink brush. It's nothing too fancy. Creating some interesting line around the leaves. Poinsettias kind of have like a wrinkly sort of edge to them, which I think is kind of interesting. They're not like super smooth leaves, but I am kind of simplifying in certain areas. It's already a lot going on with the composition, so I didn't want to do too much because I'm already going to be adding a lot of detail and a lot of lines. A technique that I like to use with ink brush pen is doing kind of a lighter touch around the areas where your light source is, and then kind of a heavier hand on those shadowy areas. So the areas that you would want to be darker or that you would see as darker in the composition, doing really thick, heavy lines there, and then really light-handed brushwork around the highlighted side. That's a really easy way to kind of show value without doing a bunch of shading. It's an interesting way to add, sort of imply value with the line quality. just going in with a regular watercolor paintbrush and just plain water and kind of filling in those white spots. Normally I do like to leave some white spots when I'm doing marker drawings. I think it adds an interesting texture to it. You can always go in later digitally and add in a color to fill in those white spots, or you can just leave it. This one I kind of wanted to do a mix of both, so in some of those leaves I left the white areas, but in the flower itself I wanted it to be kind of lighter red for the highlighted areas. And then I also added kind of ink into those pools of water just to add a little bit of darkness to it, to kind of tone down some areas to make the flowers stand out a little bit more. Something that I would critique myself on with this drawing is I wish I would have focused on the value contrast a little bit more. It did end up blending together a little bit, especially using such a dark red and then doing such heavy shading on the red leaves of the flower. It kind of seemed to get lost a little bit. Maybe in the future I would do a lighter red, use a lighter hand, or maybe just do white flowers against a really dark green leaf. I don't know. I still really like the way it turned out, but that would be my critique of my own drawing. Basically, I'm just going over with water in more places. Since I used all water-based media, even the ink can create some really interesting effects by going over it again and kind of letting the ink bleed onto the marker and letting those pools of water pull some of the ink away. I think it creates an interesting texture, and I'm all about textures. Another pen that I'm using is this white brush pen. It's basically just like a water-based white ink, I guess. It's not super strong, but I do really like it. That is the final drawing. I had a lot of fun with it. It was kind of a fun experiment and created some interesting texture in it. I might use it in the future for, like I said, a card or something. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you again soon.